Welcome. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and today I'm analyzing the Mackenzie Shirilla case. I will be focusing on the mental health and psychological indicators while providing the backstory. I don't just talk about the crimes. I talk about the psychology behind the crimes and the mysteries that captivate us. I look beyond the facts of the case to understand the why of the crime. Subscribe and like this video if you want to learn more about the mental health and psychological indicators of true crime cases like this one. My analysis is based on my speculation. It's not a diagnosis of anyone involved in this case. The most compelling mental health indicator we must first examine is the escalation of threats into instrumental violence. The court found that Mackenzie Shirilla intentionally used her car as a weapon. Homicide of her boyfriend, 20-year-old Dominic, and his friend Davian in Strongsville, Ohio. We're not looking at momentary lapse of judgment here. We are looking at an act that was deemed premeditated, a crucial distinction. We are not looking at a momentary lapse of judgment here. We are looking at an act that was deemed premeditated, a crucial distinction in the psychological analysis of this crime. Instrumental aggression is behavior where the primary goal is not emotional release, but achieving an external objective. And in this situation, the definitive final termination of a relationship on her own terms. The relationship between Mackenzie and Dominic was repeatedly described by multiple witnesses as highly toxic, characterized by severe volatility and controlling behavior. Just 2 weeks prior to the fatal crash, Mackenzie had made an explicit and chilling threat to Dominic. She threatened to intentionally crash the vehicle with him inside. This moment is critical. It shows that the concept of murder-suicide, or at least the threat of it, was already an established psychological option for her. When she felt control slipping away, her mind immediately defaulted to the destructive, life-ending maneuver as a form of ultimate leverage. This prior threat transforms the later crash from a potential accident into a recurring, deliberate strategy of control. What kind of psychological structure makes vehicular destruction a viable option to a breakup? It suggests a profound intolerance for rejection and abandonment issues, the inability to cope with the reality that someone else has the power to leave you can trigger an emotional crisis that an unstable psyche translates into a demand for absolute, irreversible power. The internal psychological mechanism decided, if I cannot have control over the relationship continuing, I will exert control over its ending. The evidence reveals a deeper pattern of sensation-seeking and invulnerability. Long before the final destructive act, Mackenzie displayed a consistent, observable pattern of high-risk behavior that she documented and shared on social media. Investigators found over 100 instances of reckless driving captured on her own phone. These weren't isolated incidents. They included videos of her driving erratically at high speeds and while under the influence of substances. Psychologically, this pattern of repeated documented reckless behavior suggests a person of high tolerance for risk and a sense of invulnerability. This is the behavioral framework. She repeatedly placed herself and others in danger, yet seemed to believe that the rules and consequences that apply to everyone else would somehow exempt her. For someone already accustomed to breaking boundaries, both legal and physical, the psychological barrier to escalating a relationship crisis into a fatal crash is significantly lower. The habitual pursuit of the ultimate thrill, the ultimate risk, ultimately the ultimate fatal action, points toward a significant deficiency in consequence-based thinking. It's a failure to connect actions with realistic outcomes, a hallmark of impaired ability to plan beyond immediate gratification or emotional need. If she publicly documented her recklessness, was the act of driving at high speeds emotional release, or was it a form of foreshadowing, preparing her for the final ultimate display of power? Let's turn to the evidence of calculated premeditation. The court's finding of premeditation is perhaps the most damning psychological piece of evidence we have. The crash was not a random event on a main highway. Mackenzie drove to a specific isolated service road in Strongsville, a location she had no typical reason to use. The route, police determined, was a deliberate detour. This act of scouting and executing a route separates the emotional chaos of the breakup from the physical mechanics of the murder. Premeditation requires a period of cool, deliberate planning, where the emotional intensity of the moment is set aside to handle logistics. She did not swerve or lose control. The crash reconstruction showed she accelerated the car approximately 100 miles per hour and held the accelerator pedal at 100% up until the point of impact with the brick building. There were no brake marks on the pavement. This calculated, precise execution is a psychological hallmark of instrumental violence. It's the opposite of passionate crime. It demonstrates a singular, cold focus on the objective, the destruction, with no indifference from the normal human instinct of self-preservation or the preservation of others. The motive here, as argued by the prosecution, seems to be a desperate threatening to end the relationship. The failure to secure control over the relationship led to the fatal action of controlling its final moments. The psychological impact of rejection on an individual with a high need for control can manifest in this extreme destructive way, turning personal failure into collective tragedy. The singular focus on Dominic, which allowed her to view Davian as expendable, tell us about her capacity for empathy and her ability to prioritize her emotional needs above other human life. The final critical psychological angle is the profound absence of the post-act remorse or congruent grief. Both Dominic and Davian died instantly in the crash. Mackenzie survived. Her behavior in the intimate aftermath and the time leading up to her conviction offers a horrifying window into her mental health indicators. While the families of the victims began the agonizing process of grieving, Mackenzie was observed and recorded attending concerts, having parties, and posting on social media, behaving as if the event were a minor inconvenience or a distant memory. This complete emotional disconnect is what we call a deficiency of affect empathy. It's the inability to feel or genuinely respond to the immense suffering she had caused. A person who genuinely loved their partner, as she claimed to love Dominic, would typically be consumed by grief, guilt, or trauma. The public, seemingly carefree social media activity suggests a powerful defense mechanism of disassociation, or a fundamental lack of psychological capacity to truly comprehend the permanence and brutality of her actions. She appeared to be prioritizing the maintenance of a normal social facade over internalizing the reality of two deaths. The defense she presented in court was that she wished she could remember the crash, implying a blackout or a loss of memory. However, the evidence from the car's event data recorder, the acceleration, the lack of braking, the chosen route, it all suggests a hyper-focused and intentional sequence of events. The psychological statement made by her actions is one of clear purpose, not amnesia. The mental health profile established by these clues is complete. Reckless behavior established a comfort with risk. Prior threats exhibited the murderous intent. Premeditated routing established a cold planning. And the lack of remorse established a profound deficit in empathy. This case is a realization that the toxic relationship was merely the trigger, but the underlying psychological framework, the desperate need for control, the risk-seeking, and the lack of empathy was the engine that drove the car into the wall. It was a fatal collision of external conflict and internal psychological fragility. The tragedy of Dominic and Davian is that they became victims of a psychological crisis that was already fully operational. Dominic's own family articulated this, stating that she killed him in cold blood over her fear of abandonment. The two young men became casualties in the ultimate destructive act of self-serving rage and control. What did you think about this case? Were there any elements that stood out to you? And if you want more mental health analysis of true crime stories like this one, be sure to subscribe for more. And if you found this case compelling, be sure to watch this next story. It will make you more aware of your surroundings. Thank you for joining me today. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe.